So a quick, simple way to get your thinking in the right order, critically thinking, is to think, what is the thing most demonized? Check that, might have some truth directionally around that. I wanted to do this episode today to kind of recap about things I learned from my recent trip, since I posted a video to my audience that I was going to go to higher elevation to just kind of study a little bit of high altitude. I was able to do that for some time, and I was also able to do a speech and a radio show appearance and do some other networking opportunities, meeting some great people across this country. And I realized when I got back, I've been back for some time, and I never really updated the audience properly on what I learned. And it takes time sometimes to think about what you've learned. Sometimes you get hit with an epiphany and it comes all at once and you have to unpack it, and it takes time. And sometimes you don't get hit with a euphoric epiphany when you're learning in life, but you get little subtle nudges, and you just still have to wait and let it simmer and cook in your heart and mind, and so before you can articulate it. But I had a great experience, and I'm thankful for those who were supportive and reaching out about my journey to kind of investigate this firsthand, to be at an altitude above 8,000 feet, which is what Dr. Ray Peat, the late great biologist who we've had on the show and learned from, had recommended for folks, that you really get a lot of serious health effects improving when you get closer to that threshold of 8,000 feet or up. And I was able to get closer to 10,000 feet, not as long as I'd like because of time constraints and so forth, but it was enough that I can't complain, in the sense of having enough time to adjust to higher altitude. Along the way, I was able to, before that, meet up with folks who are doing great things in the world of imaginative inventions and innovations in the world of health and energy production. And those were fantastic opportunities that I hope to bring some of those folks that I met onto this program for our audience to learn about what they're developing in the world of energy and health and other things. So many interesting ideas that dovetail with where we're investigating things. And then we are also able to, of course, experience some high altitude adjustments and notice some health effects that were good. And I just think it just is an opening to learn more and to build on it and understand perhaps what Ray was really fascinated with at the tail end of his public career as a voice of nutrition and health and biology, which is the critical importance of retaining carbon dioxide, or CO2, which seems to be what takes place in the Haldane-Bohr effect. You're able to retain more CO2 at higher elevations. And CO2, far from being a waste product, as textbooks tend to relegate it to, CO2 is actually the crown jewel of our metabolic system, our energy system, which is the kind of layer of the human body which is interfacing the most with our soul and our spirit. Our energy system is kind of this threshold by which the soul and the spirit are operating in this kind of intertwined dynamic between the body and the spirit. And the metabolism kind of is this kind of the seat of all of these things meeting and interacting, not in some kind of Cartesian way of they're over here and over there and then they meet, but rather this kind of infusing in this kind of merger and dance that is hard to put into words other than to say that we're made in the image of the Trinity.
Yeah, I'm so excited to learn about what you experienced on your trip, David. So, first of all, like, how do you feel after after going on the trip? How does your overall health? How is everything going on right now?
Well, I've noticed a few things that, like, of course, it's easier in some ways to breathe at Florida, and in other ways, it's harder. It's a hotter, more humid environment in Florida, even at this time of the year when we enter closer to fall. And it's still, well, when I was there in August, it's pretty hot, so I was glad to avoid that. But when I come back, it's pretty hot in Florida, even though it's September. But at the same time, when you go to a higher altitude, you can feel things a lot more. When your first day in 10,000 feet, unless you're really trained and adjusted to it, everything that you do at a lower elevation, you feel a little bit more, and more energy being used to do it. And that's because you have less oxygen pressure, and that is allowing less oxygen for every inhalation you take. Your body has to change its metabolic situation to retain more CO2 to more efficiently use oxygen in your tissues and including your brain. I think that the first few days that I got to 10,000 feet, after being at around 7,000 feet for 10 days, I felt like when I got to the 10,000 feet, I noticed it wasn't a very powerful thing, but it felt a little bit like, um, I would say, a mood depressant. And I thought to myself, well, I remember a study that I looked at where they took mice and they put them in a high altitude, a synthetic high altitude environment. And the first few days, the mice were just like frozen. They just stood there, and it wasn't frozen because of temperature. It was just that they didn't do anything to the temperature. They just mimicked the conditions of the environment at altitude. And the first, I think it was 8,000 or 9,000 feet. In the first few days, the researcher said the mice were just frozen. And I thought about it, man, I feel so like down. I thought I'd be coming here and feeling a fountain of youth effect in terms of, my usual creativity just going up another notch. And instead, it was kind of like a malaise. I said, what is this weird feeling? And I thought it was probably my body adjusting because I didn't have, a lot of people have like altitude sickness where they're, if they have some issues metabolically or whatever going on, they go up into altitude and they get nauseous, they get sick, dizzy, they can't walk around. I didn't have any of that. I just had a mood malaise that was just there for a few days, a couple of days, 3, 4 days. I don't know. I could look back and look at my notes maybe and see, but then it just, went away. And yeah, I mean, I noticed wound healing faster and up there than normal. And noticed, I would say, an increasing energy improvement the longer I was there. And I think if I could have stayed there at the 10,000 foot area that I was at for about 30 days, I would have noticed even significant improvement. But Dr. Peat said that if you get, even a few weeks at altitude of 8,000 or up, you can have up to a year and a half of metabolic and mitochondrial improvements and benefits. And I've noticed since coming back to, sea level at Florida that, there is a little bit of a noticeable improvement in terms of just energy and doing the general activities or exercises that I would do in a given week.
I think I heard somewhere that Dr. Pete spent most of his later years living in Mexico. Is that connected to the altitude thing you're talking about?
Yeah.
Because was he living in a high altitude place over there as well?
Yeah. And I don't think he spent a lot of time there. I think he was there more when he was younger, actually. He had Blake College, which was his college he did in a house. He had a kind of innovative way of educating people, and I think he did that in Mexico, near Mexico City, for some time, and then he got, pressure or something was going on. He had done it in Oregon, and then he got attacked or something, so he just left there and went and brought it to Mexico. But yeah, I think that he may have been going there, in his older. I don't really know his biography details all the way through, but he did go there. I think one of the benefits was to get the higher altitude because when you're in that area, I think let's see, Mexico City, if I'm not mistaken, is even higher than 10,000 feet. So, um, for example, let's see, Mexico City altitude is uh, okay, it's 7,000 feet. So it's a little less than 8,000. But you've got a lot of towns over there that are going to be even higher than that. And I think that is if you can get that kind of high altitude on a longer term basis, it will have improvements on your health. But what Mexico does is it's closer to the equator, so it's got more sun and it's got more dry heat than let's say you go to Colorado and it's in a different part. The the it's a different it's a different environment for your sunlight exposure, particularly when you get into the winter months and you think about how you're not going to get as much sunlight exposure on your skin when you're bundled up in a bunch of winter clothes. So you're not getting a lot of vitamin D, and so I think that can cause some health effects that you don't get that same negative health effects when you're at a warm, high altitude environment like Mexico City.
You mentioned that during your stay in Colorado, so a lot of people experience uh, no, altitude sickness and all of these things. Is that connected to the diet of that region, which is like the seed oil consumption and everything? Does that impact how you feel in high altitude?
Yeah, I think if you're probably eating a very high seed oil, PUFA rich diet, you're probably going to find that is going to contribute to a negative adjustment to the higher altitude, because your PUFA is going to be blocking your ability to retain and utilize CO2 in the body. It's going to impair your thyroid function. It's going to impair your ability to metabolically thrive and adjust to a super higher altitude than what you're used to. So if you're eating a lot of PUFA and seed oils and other inflammatory compounds on a regular basis, when you go up to altitude, you can find that to be causing more of a painful experience. So, yeah, I think that's what you'll see with folks who still have high rates because I was in Colorado. You see, there's still a lot of people who are obese or have serious diseases. So it's just showing you that you know it's not the only thing. It's not like I'm talking that CO2 is some kind of magical X factor that changes everything singularly. There obviously has to be dietary considerations that are going to be brought along in the process of using CO2 more efficiently to regain your health and of mind and body.
So, what was your diet like when you were there? Uh, like, what kind of diet should people be ideally on to have the maximum impact of CO2 in your body?
I think it would be what Ray has recommended for uh, you know the sugar and milk and orange juice and fruits and um, getting some saturated fat in from coconut oil, orange. That's basically what I tried to do as much as I could. I had limited options for a stove. I didn't have a stove, so I couldn't cook things that I like to do. But you bring some carrots along, and I don't do don't always have the time to do the Instagram friendly carrot salad. Sometimes you just have to take a carrot if you're in a limited situation, if you're traveling, and eat it with a spoon of coconut oil. And I don't mind that. Some people, you got to eat it, dress it up and heat the oil, make it liquid, and make a whole little salad. And that's wonderful. But sometimes just to get the benefit, you take a spoonful of coconut oil, before or after a carrot, you're going to get the same effect basically. Take a shot of vinegar if you have access to it if you want. I mean, sometimes you just have to do what you have to do, and and especially when you're traveling and you don't have access to a stove, which is really helpful when you're trying to eat healthy. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's, one of the things that I want to throw out there, is just a hypothesis and a thought process for us to think about as it relates to CO2. And I'm not suggesting this as a conspiracy theory. I'm just expressing this as a kind of thought experiment, and maybe it's a theory. But if it's a theory, it's a conspiracy in the sense of it's implying that, like that quote, that the only conspiracy theory that really matters is the conspiracy of heaven and hell, right? There's these forces of evil and there's forces of good and acting in the history of the world. And there's a book that C.S. Lewis was famous for writing. It's not as famous as his C.S. Lewis trilogy on the Narnia series, but his book, Wormwood, talking about from the perspective of an older, wiser demon who is helping his nephew, I believe, as a little demon, learn the art of how to tempt and seduce man into evil through all these subtle ways. And if you think of it that way, I have to wonder what a wormwood would maybe have to say about our current situation. So let's just do this thought experiment, okay? Assuming that Ray Peat is correct, that CO2, and not just Ray Peat, but a whole host of folks, Dr. Lewis Coleman, who we've had on the show, we've had, if you look into Hans Selye's work, you look into some of these other researchers that are long forgotten because they were 100 years ago in medical science that has not been really maintained in the textbooks in terms of proper knowledge, that a lot of folks believe that CO2 was this master molecule of metabolism. If metabolism is the area of body and soul energetically expressed in our lives, and your metabolism is master regulator is carbon dioxide, which we get every time we're inhaling. And if the foods we're eating, like PUFA, which is in chicken fat, which is in pork fat, which is in, these seeds and nuts, and it's in a lot of olive oil, it's in avocados, it's in avocado oil. Some of the things that the anti-seed oil people still promote, unfortunately, that may be causing inflammation and problems. But this PUFA seems to be, according to Dr. Peat, looking at the literature of science and how it actually works, these mechanisms of the body, that CO2 is the master regulator of your metabolic health, of your ability to heal properly, of your ability to avoid these chronic diseases that are associated with the Western world. If that's correct, it makes you believe, if you think about Wormwood, what kind of devious plotter, and again, we don't have to think of this as a conspiracy. This could be a mimetic phenomenon, because if we want to look at it from Rene Girard's perspective, he would say that the Satan is the absence of being, of personal agency and your conscience being alive. And one could imagine that those who are at the top of our power systems in the world are also kind of stuck in a stupor of mimetic contagion in terms of believing in groupthink and believing in their own BS, or maybe more cynical purposes of knowing what they're doing is harmful to humans and the planet and doing it anyways. Then you have another layer of evil. Whether it's a demonic conspiracy in the traditional sense of spirits, or whether it's simply human evil or a mixture of both and mimetic groupthink, regardless of the precise recipe of the evil, I think it's interesting to think about the idea that if Ephesians 6:12 is correct, when Paul says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness in high places and against the rulers of darkness. Who are these people? And how would they hurt people? If demons and Satan, this system of satanic violence, hates human beings and wants to destroy human life, then what better way, if Dr. Peat is correct about what CO2 is, and other scientists who don't get the kind of attention of the multi billion corporate press and academia, these dissident scientists that are not creating their own science, but looking at the actual data as it really is, and maybe conducting their own science too, but not crackpot stuff. This is legit in the textbooks of science. It's just forgotten because it's old. A lot of the basis of their ideas. But if they're correct that the CO2 is the key molecule of health and vitality and metabolism, and also related to your mental health, that the impairment of CO2 retention in the body is associated with all of these mentally ill states of chronic depression and mood disorders, bipolarity, all these different things that are all too common in the world that we live in today. Then if you wanted to harm humans even more, you would convince them to hate the very thing which is the master molecule of their health and vitality, and to want to capture its existence out of the atmosphere by blotting the sun or raising fields or killing thousands of cows or, artificially manipulating the market so that meat through taxation and other means becomes this thing that is not able to be eaten by most people. Or whatever the other various things that we are all hit with a full court press by globalists to hate CO2. And in fact, it could be the very thing that is the crown jewel, not just of our health, but if we are the crown jewel of creation, then maybe creation itself, plants, fungi, even good bacteria, even animals, all of these things may benefit from a healthy increase in the CO2 in the atmosphere. And that's just something that we shouldn't be afraid of, but rather should embrace, not through pollution means. We should have completely free atmospheres in terms of having no pollution polluted. But aside from that factor, we should have this perhaps rethinking of what CO2 actually may be as a role in terms of improving the metabolism of the planet Earth and actually allowing us to maybe be good stewards of animals and plants and other things to actually become better in all ways that we could possibly imagine. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. And the thing about the CO2 that you just mentioned there, would you be in agreement with like the people in high positions of power? They say that CO2 increasing in the atmosphere is not particularly good for us. That's why they are pushing the green agenda a lot of the times, right? Like decreasing carbon emissions and all of that. So it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're in agreement with them when you say that CO2 is increasing in the atmosphere. The only difference is you say that it's not necessarily bad that it's increasing. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I'm suggesting
Yeah.
that I'm suggesting that they've got it backwards. They have convinced the world population, like, what is the one molecule that is most like hated by media and corporate and government agencies around the world? Like, what do they talk about? What molecule?
CO2.
Yeah. And then if you think about it, if you're looking at this like a movie plot, trying to look for why would all these people who are unethical on literally every matter that matters in our lives, we should assume the same unethical worldview as a possibility behind their hatred of CO2. And then the question would be, why is that? Why would they hate CO2? And why are they telling us to hate CO2? And maybe, just maybe, one of the ways in which we will fight the information war, which is a spiritual war, will be when we start to rethink as a human species what CO2 exactly does that it's not a waste product, and that the levels in which it's rising will actually increase our ability to have beautiful plants on less acreage even, and feed people better and feed the poor better, and actually create opportunities for, in the long term, the whole planet evolving, so to speak, into a better direction. Ray Peat was a fan of a guy who, his name was Vernadsky, who talked about the noosphere, which is that the human beings, far from being a parasite on the earth that's harming the earth, are actually a critical component when they choose to do the right thing and the healthy thing in the metabolically high energetic stage, which is away from stress and towards thriving and euphoria and discovery and creativity, all the things we were meant to do once we're restored in the Christian story, incarnationally. That's the exact purpose of us being here on earth, is to be creative co-participants in evolving the earth so that the lion one day will lay down with the lamb, and we will facilitate that kind of microevolution happening through our creative, nonviolent, peace, non-coercive means of creatively enhancing our own health with healthy ethical practices for agriculture and food production and medicine production and, safety production. Maybe we can get away from these reckless wars that pollute the planet and all these other factors that are holding us back. When we think creatively, we will have an ability to solve problems nonviolently easier. And when we're able to do that, we'll be able to take charge of our evolution, so to speak, not fully, but rather in the image of the triune God that we have been brought into relationship by Christ. We have been brought into the relationship of the triune God of the universe. And being a participant in that dance, that creative dance, we are invited to play with that. And here's the real simple way to know whether you're falling into the Tower of Babel mistake of trying to be God, right? Is, do you have a problem giving God credit in your name and the way you speak, but also in your actions, because God doesn't do things violently and coercively. So when people say, well, I'm worried, you sound like Klaus Schwab. No, Klaus Schwab is the perverted, cheap ripoff of what I'm talking about. Okay? So all that globalist stuff, we're going to make the world a better place, but it happens in a way that we're going to have to call some of the population, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. That's how I know that's satanic, because Christ does not use sacrifice. He doesn't say, well, here it is, folks. The Jesus method is here. I'm the king, but here's the bad news. We got to find a way to kill a large portion of you guys because you got carbon dioxide. Too much of it in the atmosphere. That's literally what the Neo-Malthusian model is. They don't say it that way. They want to call it through various means, through eliminating people's ability to reproduce healthily, which is happening. Ironically, because of the reduction of CO2 retention in the human body by PUFA and other things, microplastics, they have dramatically dropped fertility to a point where we are in a state of possible extinction. Now, if I was a devil that hated humans, you couldn't come up with a better model of strategy. When will Christians start to have the same strategic thinking that they're called to do? They spend all their time strategizing about what? Reacting and complaining and talking about begging for a little Caesar to come right their wrongs through might and force. They don't believe in Christ. They put their faith in princes when you talk like that. We should believe in Christ, that we would do greater things than he. And that means using our mind and body and soul to think creatively and look right in front of you. Here's a simple heuristic that helps you think well as a Christian in our world. Look where the things are most demonized. That doesn't necessarily mean they're good, but if it's a simple heuristic, meaning it works most of the time, it's very effective. I won't say most of the time, but it's a very helpful way of thinking quickly when you need to make discernment on a snap judgment before you need to unpack it. So a quick, simple way to get your thinking in the right order, critically thinking, is to think, what is the thing most demonized? Check that, might have some truth directionally around that. So that can be a person. That would be Jesus Christ. There's nobody more demonized on earth than Jesus Christ. Literally. persecuted, hated by all. And then we saw what happened. But from that same model of thinking, what ideology is most demonized? Maybe there's a truth we can learn from. What is the molecule that is most demonized by the powerful? Well, carbon dioxide by a long shot. Also, other things that are maligned and misunderstood in health by omission or by, speaking against it. Carbon dioxide's up there at the top, but you got things like testosterone, which is, we brainwash the masses to think that, testosterone is this violent molecule when it's actually a calm. When you have high, healthy testosterone in relation to estrogen, you're going to tend to have a little bit more calmness in your ability to act in an assertive way, but not in a crazy, violent, can't control myself, low impulse way. So that's another lied against molecule, which is important for fertility of the human species, by the way. Sugar is maligned. Saturated fat is maligned. Those are essential. Saturated fat for the development of cholesterol and creation of healthy fertility and healthy, molecules of our body. So all of those things are vilified, These molecules are scapegoated. And what I'm trying to say is perhaps, just perhaps, hypothetically, it may be that, there's an attempt to eliminate the human species through all these creative, strategic means by forces that hate human beings and don't want the human life to be flourishing. They don't want human life to be healthy, creative, gregarious, peaceful, nonviolent, but want to put us in a zero-sum, extremely stressed state that can't reproduce itself and is afflicted by long, agonizing, painful mental illnesses and physical debilitating chronic diseases. Starts maybe with rethinking CO2. It's like right in front of you. If you want to be a scapegoat detective like a good Christian, just investigate that rock and see what bodies are underneath it, so to speak. You see what I mean?
As Christians, we are far too quick to reduce everything that's in scripture to a salvation in the afterlife. But I mean, I can certainly attest to the fact that ever since I've been on, ever since I've implemented some of Ray Peat's findings into my own personal life, I've been praying more. I've been reading scripture more. I've been going to church more, certainly more than prior. And it's just a testimony to the fact that having a stressed out mindset is not particularly good to grow in your faith, right?
Yeah.
Like you need to be in that abundant mindset
Yeah.
in order to be in your order to have, like most Christians strive for, is in order to have that personal relationship with God,
Yeah.
right? You need to have a very as you've alluded to many times, like
Yeah.
you need to have that childlike mindset.
Does Jesus,
Uh,
that's a great point. Does Jesus want us to survive or to thrive?
Certainly, thrive. Yeah,
Okay, so if Jesus wants to thrive, then we should have an abundant mindset because that abundant state of mind, right, puts you in a position where you can have a spirit of thriving that people are positively impacted most of the time that you're existing on earth and being around people, your relationships are thriving, not just surviving, right? Well, think about this. What does it say about popular Christian notions? And I'm not saying they're Christian in the true sense of what Christ wants, but Christian in how we end up misinterpreting what we're supposed to do. But what does it say about a lot of Christian notions where they focus their entire framework of what is the point of Christ? It's to save me into heaven. Now, if that's your fixation on your relationship with your creator, Have you filtered your relationship with your creator with a thriving mindset or just a survivor's mindset? In other words, if you're focused in your relationship of what you think your relationship with Christ is about, that it's about
Hmm.
actually, if you ask most Christians, what is your spiritual life about? A lot of it is oriented one way or another to, I need to get to heaven, right?
Yep.
Now, if that's your disposition and your relationship to your creator, are you approaching God with a survivor mindset or a thriving mindset?
Survivor mindset.
Right. You're trying to survive going to hell. You don't want to
Yeah.
go there, right? You're trying to avoid that. So if you've got a misalignment in the way you're approaching your relationship with your creator, no wonder it's going to produce the situation we're in, where people imagine their relationship with their creator is primarily about being a good person and getting to heaven, as opposed to heaven coming to earth and being a participant through your good works, not as a Boy Scout getting points on a merit badge, but rather you become of sound mind, heart, soul, and you let go of your sins so that you can create and be a part of the creative process of God's creation and his grand story. That's a thriving mindset, not a survivor mindset. Survivor, now sometimes you have to feel that way. But it's funny that those who actually get afflicted into prison, further faith and so forth, end up having more of a thriving mindset, like I described, than the survivor, I just need to get to heaven mindset. That's not the mindset that God has. I mean, I don't see that. I see Jesus really focused on healing the problems of social relationships. I see him dealing with the problem of human violence. I see him dealing with the problem of eating and feeding yourself and growing food with his stories and parables and illustrations and miracles of the fish and loaves and the miracle of the the excessive yield of fish in the nets. All of these stories are dealing with basic primal existential things about what it means to be human. And yet all we do is turn it into this survivor mechanism to just hopefully be a good enough or great enough person that you get to heaven. That's a survivor's mindset. That's not what Jesus is showing. The abundant life is here on earth, and everything in it, including carbon dioxide, is infused with God. God's energy in this is sustenance, is sustaining, and is designed in everything. And I would say carbon dioxide, if Ray Peat and others are right, that it's the actual crown jewel of our breathing, would probably be a primary interest of God in his design of us. But he would want us to know what it does and use it wisely, use it beautifully, use it thoughtfully to make beautiful plants and make beautiful new fruits we can't even imagine yet. And maybe one day to help the lion lay down with the lamb. And there's a lot to that. I just skipped forward a lot into eschatology, but why not work on it now? The Bible begins in a garden, it ends in a city, which gives us this abundance mindset of thriving, not just surviving, not just having that, let me just make it barely be good enough. Well, guess what? That's not the point of the story of Jesus. He did not do that. He was not focused on that as just make sure you're a good boy. You become a righteous person by the ability of Christ himself. His faith is what saves you. His faithfulness is what saves you. And trusting in him, the word faith in Christ that we see often in the New Testament, is living in the state of mind as if we are to become like Christ and that his way will save us. That's what it means to have faith in Christ. It means I trust that when Jesus says God desires mercy, not sacrifice, that he didn't say, unless the New World Order or Democrats or whatever are running your life, then you use violence. He didn't say that. He didn't give you an asterisk out of this disposition. And the point of having faith in Christ is to actually have faith in Christ the entire way of our lives, as best as we possibly can have faith. Like with your little mustard seed amount of faith that I have or you have, to be able to say, you know what? I don't have to have a spirit of fear. Okay. The crowd is run by fear and anger, I don't have to mimic that fear and anger. And so much in the reactionary movement of politics, the right-wing reactionaries, they're mimicking their leftist oppressors. They're mimicking their spirit of fear and their spirit of anger.
Yeah, all that you mentioned, have having people generally having a spirit of fear, and again going back to that survivalist mindset. Another thing that came to my mind is when you're on a survivalist mindset, you tend to think God as some kind of a tool to get you from one place to another,
Mm.
which sort of like, I mean, kind of like makes you a selfish person, right? If you have that kind of thing that you're just concerned about your well-being, that's it. Whereas in your, in an abundant mindset, you actually like praying to God. You actually like doing that because you love God,
Right.
and you want. It's not just about surviving from going to hell, but it's all about wanting to be closer to God, because you love the closeness of God. Yeah, that's just wanted to add to what you said there, David.
Right. That's very good. He's not a ticket that you're using him because you're scared. That's just not. How does having that psychological approach to God make you become more like Jesus? How does that work? I wish people could help me understand that preach that kind of message. That they made up. I want to follow this person because I'm scared of them hurting me. If I don't, that will equal being like Jesus and having the courage to heal your neighbor and heal your enemies and love your enemies and have a disposition of nonviolent creativity. The battle of the world is about creative nonviolence versus generative violence. And our system produces generative violence through its sacrificial violence and its myth making that it tries to do through it. But we who follow the kingdom of heaven, we have to pursue a kind of creative nonviolence, finding a way to say, how can we help people renew their mind, body, and soul? I don't see this two-tier system that we've borrowed from the Cartesians and the Enlightenment that puts the domain of the mind and spirit and so forth totally out of the reach of the domain of the material. And that is just a total mistake that has led us into a mental pretzel of our own making. We have to understand the truth and really live it. And that's what you're going to create, this kind of new approach where you're not saying carbon dioxide, I should learn about carbon dioxide. Is that how I help people? Well, that's not related to my spiritual life. My spiritual life is about tell me who to pray to and why, and but in reality, our actual life that we're called to do is to actually think and act like the people that we're supposed to be following. What does the word worship really mean? It means to imitate and in awe, and awe, imitate, to imitate in awe. That's what worship is about. Who do you want to be like, and who are you mesmerized by? And if you're really mesmerized, not in an objectifying way, if you objectify these people that you read about, like Jesus, then you're never going to really actually become like them. You'll just stay in the boat of life and say, aren't you so awesome that you're a mighty God? Do you see how holy I am? Rather than saying, no, I got to get out in the boat and walk on water, and that might get me imprisoned. That might get me canceled. That might make me unpopular. That might make me called a heretic. Let me give you a clue. One of the ways that you might actually follow Christ in the world might have to do with the problem of you being called a heretic by religious leaders. Because that kind of happened to Jesus a lot. Uh-oh. Why would Jesus, if he's the master of history and he's the master storyteller of his own life, why would he have this pernicious problem where the one kind of heel character that is most persistent and most obvious are the religious leaders? You know, when God becomes man, man's false image of God, represented as religion, is his biggest villain that he has to deal with when he's walking the earth like us. Why is that? What is the author's intention by including that in every description of Jesus's life in the four gospels? Why would he include that? How come it's not in, it's really not in one of them, or it's a minor point in two of them, and it's a, you know what, it's rock solid, very loudly the kind of antagonistic foil that you see in all four gospels. I wonder what the author's intention is to put that in there. It may give us a clue when he's saying, get out of the boat and walk on water with me. Might give us a clue that if you do that equivalent thing in your life, time and time again, when no one's looking or when people are looking, whatever it calls to do that, that the biggest opponent you'll probably face are people who say they speak for God. Might be a thing. Watch out. Could be a thing. And at the same time, could also be a thing that your other opponents could be people who speak as the religious authorities of other gods of our culture, you know, like the god of money or the god of Hollywood or the god of democracy or the god of whatever, right? Nationalism or race or all these other gods that we collect. But the pernicious god, well, let me say, the pernicious group that might attack you the most could be, unfortunately, members of the religions that say they speak for the same God that Jesus was a part of, right? That the same story, that this is God's story, is Jesus' story. Might be the same people. It might be that when Jesus says a prophet is not wanted in his hometown, that is a phenomenon that every person who tries to walk on water like Christ will experience. A kind of feeling like, hey, I thought the people who are leading the house that Jesus built, I thought you guys would be the front lines in this fight with me. Well, did Jesus have that happen to him? Why would you expect anything otherwise for yourself? Maybe that's where we need to get our minds around that. I don't know. Just something to think about.
That happens when a certain society or a community that has been infected by the gospel, and that community boxes Jesus into a certain kind of like an antique piece on their shelf, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh no, we like everything the way it is. We kind of built this thing uh, on the foundation of what Jesus has given us, but we kind of want it to stay that way. We don't want that thing to grow. And it's like it's almost bizarre in a sense because as a student of Gerard, like Gerard spoke of Jesus breaking the sacrificial taboo, but here you have in our modern world a kind of tabooification of what Jesus has
Yeah.
preached, right? Like it's like making a taboo out of the gospel in a sense.
Right. Say, unpack that a little bit more. I think you're hitting a really good point that needs
Well,
to be
I mean,
unpack that more as best as we can here. It's good. I like
well,
that.
I mean, like it's like, I mean, just look at uh, like all of these victimism that's spreading around. Like, why is that happening? I think it's happening because we don't want to go all the way with the gospel message.
Yes.
It's happening because we want to
Yeah.
make the gospel message like the religions of old,
Yes.
right? Like the sacrificial religions of old.
Yeah.
But the problem is that even though we may try to make it into that, like like make the gospel into a sacrificial religion, even though we may try to attempt to do that. Will It's not really meant to be contained like
Yeah.
that in a box, right? Like
Yeah.
gospel, you'll just fail if you do that, and that's why you'll have all of these like total chaos, just schisms all around, and all the schisms are based on who's the victim, who's worthy to be on the cross, and it kind of defeats the purpose of everything, and yeah, I mean that's that's the way I look at it, at
Yeah.
least, like it's
But we're told here, think about this. We're told, that we're coming, heaven's coming to earth, okay? And a lot of people, you know, they don't live like that, right? They have more faith in the soul than they do in the existence of earth. And they don't like their body. They think the body is a profane thing. But the body is to be planted, like Paul says, as a seed that turns into something even better. It's like even better matter, right? Whatever word you want to use, it doesn't matter. It's just, we're using these words as symbols, but there's not a denigration of material as some kind of second rate part of us that has to be discarded. That's a Gnostic, or that whole world, whether you're looking at, different forms of dualism, Gnosticism, Platonism. I know that steps on people's toes, but a lot of those things end up leading to a kind of second rate aspect of the body. And this kind of less just about the soul. So I'm like, well, hey, could we use CO2 to heal millions of diabetics tomorrow? Yeah. But that's not that important. It's about getting your heart right, tell people you're sorry about your sin. What? Okay, that doesn't make any sense, right? What is sin? Missing the mark, okay? If you're producing a society where 9-year-olds have diabetes, you're missing the mark as a society. You're telling me I can't deal with that sin? Okay. Okay, we can't use our mind. Okay, someone tells me put CO2 around legs, you can heal the ulcers on someone's foot that weren't able to be healed as effectively in the traditional medical establishment. And you're telling me we should hide that light? Hide it under a bushel. No, I'm going to let it shine. What is going on here about people's conception? It's because they are mitigating the power. They're trying to curtail the power of the gospel to be an apocalyptic inbreaking into all of our lives. And they'd rather take pieces of the gospel as a safety blanket to protect them from their fear of the establishment or whatever. You see, that's what it's about. People are, the angels said, fear not. They said, no, thank you. I am going to fear fully. And I will take what I need from this tradition of Christianity to bludgeon my enemies and to create a safety blanket for my safety. That is not Christianity. Right? And so we're going to be lost so long as we don't even want to think about what Christianity really is. If we want to think about and then live out what Christianity really is, we will be plotting and thinking together how to love and heal people. And people say, no, it's about the spirit. Oh yeah, you heal the, well, guess what? You go into a nursing home right now, and you would deal with people who are alone and they're lonely and they're getting lack of vitamin D for years, lack of loving social interaction for years. And they may, because of the same PUFA and low vitamin D and mineral deficiencies and lack of social joy, they may be having what they call sundowners. When you go down and the sun goes down, and all of a sudden, the sweet little grandma you went to visit is saying, "Get out of here, you sick freak." They say, "What's going on?" Oh, that's early signs of dementia people, or, all the same energetic attack, right? And we don't walk out of there and say, "Man, I hate that little old lady I visited at the nursing home. She chewed me out." No, you recognize that there's a sickness, just like sin is a sickness, right? And it manifests itself, body and soul integrated together, right? And now if you can recognize that when someone's got sundowners and they've got early dementia, that the things that they're spewing out of their mouth that are hurting you are not something that you should hold a slight against. You're practicing in a very easier way, turning of the cheek as a disposition. You're learning to say, this person is sick. This person is not speaking of their own heart right now. This is an illness that's afflicting them, making them speak in a way that, like a rabid dog, gets rabies and it's biting violently, and it's not the dog's fault in that way. It's kind of a something else is taking over. Now, why can't we extend that same grace to all the neighbors all around us, right? Who are also impaired, whether it's mineral deficiencies, lack of vitamin D, lack of other minerals or vitamins, or poisonings from microplastics and seed oils and all these things building up for decades, to the point where people are relitigating every trauma that's ever happened to them. And then you have a whole therapy culture about embracing that stressed metabolic state as the normal that should be cherished and embraced. And they get disrupted from their gender, and they, through dysphoria, all these things, and they're being embracing the stress state, not healing from it. And then you want to tell, us that, oh, that's a biological and nutrition thing. That's kind of a side thing. Let's focus on the spiritual warfare. No, if you heal both, and there's a kind of, because we're not dualists, there's an intertwining and meshing synergistic relationship going on that elevates both of whatever you want to. I don't even think it would, this kind of entwining that we have of body and soul. So you heal the person afflicted of the sundowners or whatever, they're not going to speak from that deranged state. In the same token, the millions of people around us, men and women, who have problems with depression, who have problems with mental illness, who have problems with attention and mood swings and adrenaline spiking up out of nowhere, and aggressions and fight or flight. Oh my goodness, you're trying to hurt me every time. All these things that people are operating under. It doesn't have to be this way. Okay. And instead of reacting in fear and saying, I'm going to play a game in mimetic rivalry, they're reaching for fear. I reach for fear and imitate them. They reach for violence and aggression and racism. I reach for those same things back. That's mimetic rivalry. That's not trusting in God. Trusting in God would say, no, I can't be drawn into this. I've got to rise above it with a higher transcendent desire, an external mediator called God, who's also totally immanent, and I can see God in even my enemy. And I can find a way to heal the environment and the situation, which is creating this violent, aggressive, stressed state that draws people into their lower selves, right? And then if you do that, I think you'll notice, if you can do this nonviolently, that a lot of the spiritual things are going to be corrected at the same time. And then as you heal yourself spiritually, you're able to then deal with deeper spiritual matters and grow in wisdom. And then that growth in wisdom will allow you to be a feedback loop to improvements on the body in terms of mind and body and health and creativity. And if you can be a healthier, if we can have a nation where people don't have Alzheimer's anymore, how much more great wisdom literature might we get? Writings, poetry from people in their 70s and 80s. How much more innovations or ideas, or a movie. There's people right now, look at David Lynch. He's got emphysema, right? They said he can't even come out of the house anymore because doctors are telling him he could get COVID, right? So, if you could have people be able to rebound their health, then you could get more, vibrant, high energy, brilliant, creative dreaming from folks like him and many others into their 90s making movies, right? It's just think creatively for a second, and you see all kinds of opportunity.
David, what this conversation between you and me reminds me of, it's like and this is something I may have told you before. Uh, like, imagine you're going into a forest and you see these weird tribe worshipping this artifact, right? And along comes an Indiana Jones kind of like a figure who really know what that artifact really is, and he's pointing to that artifact and he's saying, This is not something like you can't just keep on worshipping this in a weird tribalistic way in your in some isolated part of the jungle. you, this is something that can change mankind. And David, what you're basically doing is you're playing that Indiana Jones kind of like an archetype, right? You're saying that Christianity and the teachings of Christ and all of these things and the entire dynamic of it has the potential to move us out of these crises that we are in right now. It's like it's going to not only change your perspective of the world, but it's also going to change things like marriage, for example, right? Like people nowadays who are in marriages, they are most of them are in like a survivalist mindset that you spoke of, and as a result, people, husbands and wives, don't trust each other,
Mhm.
right? And even like when young men and young women want to go into things like marriages, they always approach it with a state in a state of suspicion, right? Like they always think like, what am I going to get out of this? Like, am I going to be screwed over?
Yeah.
Am I going to be? It's like that, and that's like something that you see nowadays a lot, right? Like people don't want to get married anymore. Like you see a downward spiral of all things. Like people don't own houses, they don't get into relationships, they prefer to close themselves off from the world. It's because of this, not only this isolationist mindset, but because the very thing the things that we eat and our wrong perception of CO2 and all of these
Mhm.
things, it's all of these things affecting us, and all of these
Right.
things are causing us to be paranoid and schizophrenic and violent towards each other.
Yeah. It's a well said. There's this opportunity that we're missing. We have this time on earth, and I have, ironically enough, a kind of pleasurable anxiety in the sense of, man, so many exciting things I'd like to see, and I'd love to be a fly on the wall, like Mr. Rogers. I may not be the one that invents some of these things, but I'd like to at least help facilitate its process in happening and being developed, and also in the process of it being shared with the world in an ethical way. And the idea of being able to see how it's made for amazing ideas that we can't even fathom right now. Eye has not seen nor ears have heard what God has prepared for us. And usually that gets truncated into some kind of Gnostic idea of floating on a cloud collecting gold gems like Legend of Zelda. That's not what God had in store. That's what somebody in the Greek imagination had in store, for their fantasy. But that's not what we have. We have reality. And reality is we must get to work here on earth. That's why when there's the Great Commission, it says that, a messenger from God tells Jesus's own, disciples, why are you standing around looking in the sky? Like, get on with it. As if to say, why are you looking up in some disembodied notion of the afterlife? The kingdom of heaven comes here. Plant your seeds and be a part of the story, right? And it's a missed opportunity to hide your light because of fear. And it's a missed opportunity to put your faith and trust in princes and ideologies and books and race and skin tones and nations. Why would you put your trust in that instead of putting your trust in what Jesus does and saying, I got to do that? When Jesus tells Peter, get behind me, Satan, when Peter wants to make a political run on what Jesus is saying, that was the end of politics, period, for serious Christians. In terms of putting their faith in that, I'm not saying there might be a strategic use of politics as a teaching method or a defensive guard to protect those who do well and those who are peaceable. But it should not be the thing that we put our trust in. and our priority and our time. And yet it's exactly what we do in terms of our relationship with the culture. We spend, oh, we got a culture problem, go to the government, go to the politics, go to the newsmakers, the pundits who are going to talk about politics and talk about, policies, right? This is such a backwards approach, such a waste of time approach. Those are things you can do for fun, like if you follow football or tennis as a hobby, as a sport you watch. It's not something you do as like the priority of like what you really think about every day. You should be thinking about how to, dramatically produce wonders. I focus on the ones that I highlight because those are my own journey, but I'd love to hear other people's that, this is what the Bible talks about, that young men should dream dreams, right? What does that mean? Dream dreams about what? Being a angel in a cloud, plucking a harp. I haven't had that dream. That's not the dream. I have the dream of flying, when you're a kid and stuff, you dream of, you have a dream where you're flying in the air or something. You have exciting dreams where you see people who are dead and you get to see them again. Right? So it shows you the orientation towards God's creation is towards making it beautiful and good and establishing it with God's presence fully in all things. And you get to facilitate that happening, which includes your mind, which includes biology, anthropology, all these little left brain separations of knowledge and wisdom that we use to conceive of what we're talking about together. All of that is God's. And it's, you cannot compartmentalize and say, okay, we're going to talk about God, then we're going to talk about tradition, or if you're Protestant, you talk about the Bible, and then there's carbon dioxide over here. No, what are you doing? It's all under God. And we are not, again, it's a product of, okay, well, we're going to elevate a book. What about what God did in the creation? You're not supposed to think about that at all. That's a lower resolution thing to explore with your mind. Why would that be? God literally created it. Then he uses this anthology of stories in the Bible to give us insight into what we're supposed to do here. And instead, like you said, people are so obsessed with whether it's the book or a tradition or whatever, of grabbing it and containing it and saying, wow, I've got this power, magical, thing. And don't you come near me or I'll get you, because I'm on the right side. I've got this little magical thing. Instead of saying, no, look, if you read it, it says, get out there in the forest you're afraid of, Mr. Pagan, and go find a way to make a beautiful home with it, the wood or whatever. That's what a Christian does, right? The Christian looks to the future, right? The Christian uses nonviolence to imagine and create and make the future, right? How many people that are called what we call the leftists have a sycophantic anger and litany of issues that they're traumatized by, that they play through their head every day? So what you conceive of as this force, this mysterious force called the leftists, is in fact individuals who are each individually poisoned to hang on to their traumas that are real, because it's not just, I'm not reducing everything to food, and it's a dumb, stupid, caricaturization of what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there's a lot of folks out there who are part of the problem, so to speak, including ourselves, who hang on to grievances and guilt and bitterness and all these little spiritual afflictions without thinking creatively about how to get beyond them. And it's our job to facilitate that happening.
Yeah. Amen.
All right. Thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate your time. And as always, you can email us hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.